Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time we're going to be taking a look at Cover Me, the vintage art of Pan books, 1950 to 1965, an appraisal by Colin Larkin. Now this fantastic, beautiful hardback has just been published by those fine folks over at Telos Publishing. And wow, what a great book this is. If you're a lover of paperbacks or Pan books in particular, you're going to absolutely love this book. So without further ado, let's dive in. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. So first of all, the copies come wrapped in plastic, so they're absolutely mint when you unwrap them. I'm particularly pleased that we've got a bookmark as well, which is really nice. And on the back there's a montage of some of the great covers that are housed within here. So the book opens up basically with how the author originally acquired his collection of, I believe, about 600 original Pan cover paintings, which is quite amazing, isn't it? Obviously one of the best collections in the world. It really is fantastic. And apparently this book has taken about 30 years to put together. So when you dive into it and you see the amount of detail inside, I think you'll agree that it was worth the wait, shall we say. But yeah, fantastic. I had no idea. I do remember back in the early 90s when some of the classic artworks appeared at Bonham's auction, and I didn't actually know that some of them were from Colin's own collection. But there were 7 original James Bonds, and there was some of the Agatha Christie's, and they were sold at the time. So the collection was back then split up ever so slightly, but thankfully some of it didn't sell, and the rest of the 600 artworks were actually kept together in Colin's collection. A few years after that, a few did go astray. About 30 were stolen, and along with the help of Tim at ticket.net, they were able to find those in the end and get them restored back into the collection, which is fantastic. I found that this bit here, the background story, one of the most fascinating parts of the entire book. Absolutely amazing. One thing I would have loved to have seen, and that isn't actually in here, it's a photograph of sort of how the collection is stored. I mean, is it all in big boxes, or is it filed away sort of like poster rack size? I'd like to see that. I mean, I know storing artwork is very difficult to do, particularly to keep it all flat. So I would imagine it's all in a huge archive. And then we sort of go on to the birth of paperbacks in general, not specifically Pan books, but how paperbacks came about, which leads into the birth of Pan books. He very much compares Penguin, the early Penguin paperbacks, which were perhaps the earliest, most popular paperbacks in the UK, and then how off the back of that, with Penguin's sort of dry typographical covers, which they absolutely were, and a slightly higher brow list, how Pan, or Alan Bott in particular, saw that gap in the market where you could do illustrated covers with and authors that were slightly perhaps lower brow, but nevertheless extremely popular, and there was a massive market for those sorts of books. So this is nice, showing the boats. So a lot of the early Pans were printed in France, because when they started there was still paper rationing in the UK. So the books are printed in France, shipped down the Seine, up the Thames, and distributed in the UK that way. So this is really good, a bit of a background history on those sort of early days. I was particularly delighted to see this one. I'm a huge Colditz fan, and it was lovely to see that the latter days at Colditz, this one with a cover artwork by Sachs, had survived and is intact in Colin's collection. I wonder what happened to the original Colditz, that lovely one with the sort of the castle. It looks like almost like a horror cover, doesn't it? Because that's one of my all-time favourite Pan books of all, beyond the Bond books, of course. So then this chapter here looks at the pulp era, and it wasn't just Pan books, obviously, at this time, but there was a lot of other sort of sensationalist pulp titles coming over from America, and this sort of looks at that market, and then how Pan sort of did their own take on it. And of course, it wasn't just pan crime, although that was very, very popular in the early years, but they did touch on all other genres. So there was like romance. You could say they were almost single-handedly responsible for making war memoirs. This is post-Second World War memoirs, very, very popular, not least on the back of things like the Dam Busters and the Colditz Story in particular were massive, massive sellers for them. But they did look at other things such as science fiction, and they were early proponents of sci-fi, which Penguin hardly touched, except perhaps around this time, say Dare the Triffids and the early John Wyndhams. So here's some of their early sci-fi titles. And the way these are presented is absolutely gorgeous. The book is really, really glossy. And the photography of the original artworks is fantastic. I'm not sure if some of it's actually been touched up in some cases, sort of to tidy up the logos and make them a bit more presentable. I imagine that has happened. But even so, what a great, great job has been done here. And this just looks at, this chapter here is looking at the different sort of genres. Here's the Westerns, the Zane Grey titles. Sometimes there'll be a cover which was never used, and they've got some unused covers in here as well, which is fantastic. Another big seller there was the Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. These three Jonathan Latimer titles by cover artist by Sam Peffer. They're all really, really nice. Then this chapter here goes through the process of how the covers were made, how the logos were applied, the lettering done, a lot of it by hand. And that's, I believe, why the book focuses on this classic period up to 1965, because after that, books started to have photographic covers, which, are nowhere near as appealing. And also, they used like Letraset to do the titles. It just wasn't the same sort of appeal, which is such a shame. Another thing I found fascinating was this one says Genevieve, a fairly common title, but the original artwork for that is 3 times. It's like a 3-up of the cover that was actually used, and it was then shrunk back down. So that's an example of a pan book which has got lots of detail in it because the original was so large. Absolutely fantastic here. So many great books, and seeing them like this is just incredible. Here's an example where they've got the original artwork for The Brighter Buccaneer, and then there's the finished copy there of the book when it was published. Really nice Saint title, that one. And then chronologically, it then does mini biographies of all the pan artists. So it starts off with the earliest ones and sort of works its way through, which is a really good way of doing it. So here they are here, and they sort of start detailing them out. And it says how many pan books they actually did in total. Great stuff. I mean, I had no idea, or I hadn't really picked up on the fact that, say, this one here, Tales of the Supernatural, had a cover by Ronald Searle, a great artist. So it starts off with these early ones and then works its way through. Even Edward Bolden, one of my favourite artists from this period, who did a lot of work for Penguin at the time, he did some early pan jackets. And under each one, you'll see, like The Meaning of Treason by Rebecca West, 1956, and then the art by Val Burr. So if they've been able to identify who actually has painted the artwork, then it is credited, of course. Great stuff here. Then this looks sort of at the evolution of pan from its early days and how the look of pan overall evolved. Then this is a really nice section on the Ian Flemings, and obviously, you could say part of Pan's success in the late 50s, early 1960s was on the back of James Bond. Certainly the sales were phenomenal. It was 100 times what a normal Pan book would sell, sometimes more. And then tying in with the early James Bond movies, wow, it was a surefire recipe for success. So they are covered throughout the book here. Really fantastic stuff. Then we carry on with a few more of the artists in mini biography form. And as you can see, every actually that's interesting. So it's got, you can see a little bit of where the cover's been, the titling has been popped in place there. Every single page is just lovingly put together. It's just the attention to detail is fantastic. And when you look at these authors, these artists, and it shows you, it lists all the stuff that they did. The research is fantastic. I mean, it just is such a great reference book. I'm just love it, you know. Some great stuff here. I mean, seeing the artwork so mint and neat as well compared to perhaps some of my copies which aren't in such great condition. It's just fantastic. You just never see them like that, and they're so bright and vibrant off the page. It's really fantastic. I've always wanted a book where perhaps every single pan jacket had been scanned and popped into one sort of sumptuous hardback book similar to this. Obviously, if you go to Tim's website at ticket.net, you can see all the jackets, but it would be lovely to have them all in a permanent, high-quality form, such as this. There's two fantastic Agatha Christie jackets there by artist Roger Hall. Great stuff, aren't they? These are the sort of the editions I read. They were my mother's. When I was growing up as a teenager, she had a huge collection of Agatha Christie's, and they were predominantly Pan and early Fontana books from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Another great jacket. Beautiful. I love the Pan edition of the Maltese Falcon. Certainly one of my all-time favourite Pans. Philip Mendoza did the artwork there. Another great one, the Frogman. So as you can see, it's just terrific, absolutely terrific. And the accompanying text really is great. It's so well researched. And it doesn't just give you the history of Pan, it does tie in with all the other publishers of the period. And a lot of these artists, you know, when the work for Pan dried up, they did go on and work for other publishers. And not just on book jackets, some of them did video covers and movie posters, things like that. There's a couple more of these lovely sci-fi ones from Gordon Davies. Really like these. A lot of them great perspective covers. They reek of 50s B movies. It's another great one. I just love these. These are some of my favourite Pan jackets of that period. There was an unused cover there for the Spoletta story, and there was the corrected one, or not the corrected, but the one that ended up being used by Beth. All the same elements were there, you know, the chap lying down, the sort of the woman there, the guard, overweight guard with a gun. But that just had more impact than the original there. There's the original cover by Josh Kirby to Moonraker, one of the tougher pans to find, and I believe that was one of the ones that was sold at the Bonhams auction. I remember seeing the catalogue cover for that. These are all Josh Kirby ones. Kirby, of course, went on to be famous for doing the Terry Pratchett jackets for a long time. Then we're on to the latest sort of Pan artists and their biographies. These are great. This art, I mean, something like that. D.A. Stowe, it's almost photographic. It could have almost been taken from a still, couldn't it? The level of detail. Some of these, of course, aren't for the first editions. These are for later editions that were re-released with a different price and usually with a different jacket. It's great, isn't it? If you're into sort of 50s and 60s crime, even if you're not really into Pan books, you've got to get this book. It's just, there's so much in here. These are people who just did the odd cover, like one-off contributions. Here's a look at some of this is Ed Blanford, who did these great war covers. I mean, really detailed. Fantastic stuff here. Of course, the classic Pan book of horror stories. Here we are, look at Rex. Rex, of course, did Live and Let Die, was one of his famous ones. This is interesting, so it's got, that's the condition of the original artwork in the collection, and it's got where the titling has been redone, and you can sort of see where it was. And then this is the version that's been sort of scanned and touched up just to take off that bit of tape where they played with the titles a little bit, and that does create a better effect then. Great stuff, aren't they? Hans Hellwig, he was a very prolific pan cover artist. Did a lot of stuff for Pan. These are slightly later ones now, these 60s ones. DeMarco. They're great, aren't they? Some of these Raphael Sabatinis, these are the ones I remember my gran reading and loving when I was growing up. To see the original cover art is just fantastic. And then there's, here we are, this is the start of the extended section on Sam Peffer. Obviously my favourite pan artist. I had the great pleasure to meet Pef back in, I think, 1990, I think it was, at one of the London paperback fairs. The most generous and kind-hearted chap you could ever meet. Looking back, I feel a bit embarrassed, but I had a whole bag full of paperbacks that I asked him to sign, which he graciously did. Tim recently uncovered, I believe, from Kitty, Pef's wife, some of these stills and negatives, and these were used to base some of the covers on. So see, there's Kitty there with a black background, which Sam's photographed, and then he's used that there on the cover. And on Tim's website, you can see lots of sort of the before and after where the photo's been used. This is, there he is, Sam himself there, in a self-portrait, and he's just been used there on the cover of that Earl Stanley Gardner title, which is fantastic, isn't it? I believe he was also, he put himself into one of the Bond books as well. And why not? Why wouldn't you? And yeah, I found a copy of that one myself recently, The Case of the Fiery Fingers. And, you know, when you see them like this, I've said this during my sort of normal Pan videos, you just see these covers, they just jump off the page. And imagine if you had, 25 or so of those, 4 in a nice face out on a shelf in a bookshop back in the late 1950s, how that would impact. It really would be quite something. I just wish you had more photos of bookshops from back in that period to see how they were marketed. These are just fantastic. He's done, there's 2 here with sort of David Niven, the actor, on. What a fantastic job he's done on those. Just early paperback featuring David Attenborough on, tying to his Zoo Quest TV show of the period. And these are really great. I mean, they look so good because they're obviously slightly larger than paperback size in this book form, and they're just so bright and vibrant. Honestly, the reproduction photography of these is just fantastic. Really, really incredible. That's a nice example of a rare wraparound cover, which Pan didn't do a lot of, to be honest. And that was a lot of detail gone into that particular one there. These are all by Dave Taylor, another very prolific Pan artist. Now we're on to Pat Owen, sort of one of the later ones here. Does the later G's and some of the Bonds in reprint form. Glenn Stewart, great one, isn't it? They just sort of capture a moment from the book possibly and pop it onto the cover. Agatha Christie there, Glenn Stewart, N or M. And although the book predominantly shows a lot of the crime covers, obviously Pan did lots of non-fiction, which also needed to have their own sort of jackets. but certainly a lot of the crime titles that really stand out today as real examples of the genre. So I'm a huge fan of books about books, and this, for me, does tick two very big boxes. It's full of beautiful cover art. It's on Pan Books, which is a publisher I absolutely love, and if you watch videos on my channel, you'll know there's multiple videos on Pan, and this is really, really sumptuous. I have to take my hat off to Telos. They've done a fantastic job here. I would, if David is watching this, David from Telos, I would love something like this featuring all the Pan jackets. I think it would be fantastic. Similar to the amazing Target book, which came out quite a few years ago now, but is now like the reference for Doctor Who Target books. Something akin to that for Pan books would be superb. This is really, really great. This is courtesy of Tim, and it's the original artwork to the third Pan Book of Horror Stories by W.F. Phillips. He's an artist. I do actually have one of his covers in my collection. Fantastic. There is his jacket for number 4 as well. There's a great Diamonds Are Forever jacket by Rex. Just fantastic stuff here. And then there's a few of the classic Bond covers to finish off. And then there's a whole page of further reading and web links as well. So how cool is that? So in summary then, an absolutely amazing book. And I just knew, looking at the cover, I was going to absolutely love it. And I pretty much read it in one sitting. I couldn't put it down. It is literally that good. So if you've got anything like even a passing interest in Pan books or the history of British paperbacks from this period, you absolutely must pick up a copy of this. It's just fantastic. So once again, thank you very much for David at Telos Publishing for sending me a copy of Colin's book. I cannot recommend it highly enough. So there we are. Thank you very much for watching today. If you have enjoyed this little review, do please give the video a thumbs up. Do please consider subscribing for regular vintage Pan and vintage paperback action. And I shall look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.